Joining us now from KFI News, Steve Gregory, you have another of your fantastic specials coming up Saturday on KFI. What is it called?
9/11, 2 decades later. And this was something that I was looking at doing a few months ago because we knew it was hitting. Actually, it didn't dawn on me that we were coming up on the 20th anniversary, because I think every year goes by, people just kind of, I think, just say, oh, it's anniversary 9/11. Sometimes you don't realize the year, how long it's been. It was my friend Nico Melendez, who was an employee of the TSA. He was one of the in fact, he's in the special because he was one of the very first employees hired. He was hired 45 days after the TSA became an agency. And he was the first public spokesperson, the public affairs spokesperson. So he's the one that reminded me. He said, this year's the 20th anniversary of 9/11. I said, it is? I was trying to process that. 20 years. So I told Robin, I said, we got to do something about this, because I said, everyone's got a 9/11 story. But she and I were talking about it, and we didn't want to do, the same type of special, because the emotional part of 9/11 is always handled. There's always a documentary. There's always going to be a special. Someone's going to find someone to talk to, and that's fine. So that part of it's covered. So I came up with this angle about whether or not we're safer 20 years now than we were 20 years ago. So in doing that, I wanted to get the types of guests that were unique and not really heard from much. So I was very lucky to get Victoria Clark. Now, Victoria Clark, do you know who that is? Okay. So she was very, very nice, and we had a nice chat. In fact, all my guests were so fascinating, but I did not realize she was inside the Pentagon with Donald Rumsfeld the day that the plane hit. And in fact, I'll play for you now. And we'll just start right out of the chute. Here's a cut with Victoria Clark. This will be Tori A. She talks about the morning of and what she and her colleagues were doing.
Despite the fact that we were there working on the crisis management, if you will, of 2 commercial airliners hitting the World Trade Towers, and we felt this enormous thump and heard that noise, my first thought was not that it was a plane, because prior to 9/11, you just don't think of large planes flying into buildings. My first thought was it must have been a car bomb, because there had been rumors of different things going on around Washington, D.C. at the time after the 2 planes hit the World Trade Towers. So my first thought was it must have been a car bomb or something like that. And it actually was the Secretary of Defense himself who was our first eyewitness outside. When it happened, when the building was hit, he asked, people didn't know what had happened. He went outside the building himself, and he was on the scene very early, helped some injured people get away from the wreckage, helped get some of them to ambulances, and then he came back in and joined us. And he was the first one who was our eyewitness of the fact that it was a plane.
And we're talking about Donald Rumsfeld, of course.
Yeah, Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld.
Was that typical for someone like him? When you got someone on that level?
Yes, very typical of him, not typical of most people at that level. And I talked about this the other day at his service over at Arlington. We're in the building and we're trying to figure out what happened, and all the communications apparatus are spinning up, and he couldn't get an answer from anyone, so he went outside the building to find out for himself. Very common sense.
So I had no idea. I didn't know Rumsfeld ran outside to confirm what was going on and then started helping injured people. I did not know that. And so that's the kind of stuff that was so fascinating about doing these interviews. So we decided to take a look at like Tori's point of view, and she talked a lot about, how she had to communicate the message to the press and in essence to the world about what had happened. And as you heard her right at the very beginning of the clip, they were already working on their response to the towers being hit. They had no idea they were a target too. And that's just one example of something really fascinating in this special. So there'll be the 2-hour special. It actually airs 3 to 5 Saturday with a repeat performance from 8 to 10 Saturday night. So we're going to do back-to-back an encore presentation. There's also a companion podcast that will actually have the entire interview with Victoria and all the other guests, a 6-part miniseries companion podcast the first episode drops on Saturday and then each day for 6 days after that. We also have a very special, in fact, I'll play a clip on this now. or Tyler will have, rather. This is Handle A. This is actually Bill Handel. We came across some archive footage. Michelle Cube, to her credit, saved all of the coverage from that day for KFI. And I was just, when we started listening to it, Jacob Gonzalez, who's co-producing, we're sitting there listening to that, we're shaking our heads. It was like, this is so surreal to hear our colleagues covering that morning. And here's just a quick excerpt of Handel, just kind of how animated he was.
One of the World Trade Center buildings just collapsed. The entire building collapsed. There is nothing left of it. The whole thing just came down. The whole building is now down. Second building now collapsing. This is unbelievable. We do know that Somerset County Airport outside of Pittsburgh, a plane did go down just north of the airport. We are in it together. We have been attacked as a people. All we know, we can safely say that today, war has been declared on the United States of America. You can't even imagine the number of people that have died.
So Jacob cleaned it up, and Bill, I did an interview with Bill the other day to recount that morning and kind of what he remembers, because I don't think a lot of people know he had to fill in for Rush Limbaugh that day. And he said the president of Premier Radio called him and said, because I guess Rush had somebody else filling in, and they called Handel and said, no, we need you now. And so Handel, in this KFI studio, all of a sudden they flipped the switch and he was on 600 radio stations simultaneously. And then Rush called in to the show in the latter part of the coverage.
Because Rush couldn't get to the studio.
Oh, no, he couldn't. He was flying in a private jet, and he was grounded.
Yeah.
And he was on his way to a celebrity golf tournament for Warren Buffett. And that's where he was headed. So he was off that day.
Oh, I see. He was already off.
Yeah, he was already off. But so what we've done is we did an introduction with Bill Handel. So it'll be online. It'll be posted on probably early Saturday morning. And then if you want, you can sit and listen to the coverage, because it'll have Rich Murata. It has Handel. It has Ken Gallagher, the KFI anchor. Eric Leonard's doing live shots from downtown. Jennifer Bauman. So the original KFI news team from 20 years ago. So it's really fascinating. I love that stuff. I love that nostalgia. And you're talking about the Trade Center towers going down and the stuff that's happening. I want to play for you real quick. This is ATC chatter number 1. This is actual air controlled chatter from that morning.
We're shutting the airplanes down. We're not letting anyone go right now.
Okay. That's a good move. We're waiting to hear from security.
We're putting a ground stop on everything. There's a second plane that just hit the World Trade Center.
Stop all departures out of the center, please.
So yeah, that's what we're doing.
That was the first time in American history that there was a full ground stop in airspace, in the United States airspace. No planes could leave, and all planes were forced to land. So it was pretty interesting. So we also interviewed Bart Avery, who was on duty that day at the LA Center Air Traffic Control. And so we get his perspective as well.
Are we safer now than we were? I don't expect you to just, spoil it now. But can you just talk a little bit? We have a few minutes here. Some of the people that you talked to
Sure.
in quest of the answer to that question.
Right. And everybody that we interview, we end with that question. We ask everybody that question. Is air travel safer today than 20 years ago or 21 years ago? And are we as a country safer today than we were 21 years ago? And so the answers are all over the map. So there was no
consensus.
There's no consensus.
So people are going to have to listen to everybody and kind of decide
A couple of
whose
them
take on it is more salient to them.
Yeah, one of them surprised me in the answer. They all surprised me, to be honest with you. And then some of them, one of the guests said basically, "That's a hard question. I don't know. It's hard to answer. It's too complicated." Stuff like that was very interesting. But I did want to play real quick. I was talking to you about Nico Melendez, and this was so interesting to me because he had such a good point. And this is Nico A. He was a former public affairs spokesperson with the TSA. He was with them for almost 20 years. And he was 18 years. So he retired after 18 years. And I asked him the question, how do you defend the criticism of the TSA? Because in the beginning, it was the agency everyone was begging for. This is the agency that's going to protect us from 9/11 happening again. We're going to do full screenings on the ground. We're going to have, baggage screening, pat downs, the whole 9 yards. And everyone was on board with it. But then that the TSA became one of the most hated agencies on the planet. So I asked him, how do you defend that?
I think I always had to put the agency with the backdrop of the mantra, never forget. It seems that as the American public, we have a very short attention span. As we all say, we'll never forget, we'll never forget. But when I worked for TSA, it was very clear to me that a lot of the traveling public very quickly forgot. They were calling for better airport security on 9/12, but a year later, those same passengers were upset with the lines they had to stand in, with the invasive screening protocols, with the different machines that we had in the airport. So the challenge was informing people, reminding them, and keeping them aware of the fact that the reason we're there was to prevent another 9/11. And I think that was the biggest hurdle that we had is keeping the attention of the American public on what we were doing and why we were doing it.
It's funny. He said, part of that statement, he talked about the fact that people will stand in line at Starbucks and sit in line at Starbucks for 17 minutes because they said what they did is they had people go out and actually time all of the different places people will stand in line, and they were observing. But they didn't want to wait 7 minutes in a TSA line if certain airports. And he said people will sit there and not bat an eye for 17 minutes and wait for their Starbucks coffee. But you wait 7 to 10 minutes in a TSA line and all hell breaks loose. And he said one of them is a quick fix of coffee. The other one is your life.
Well, one of them, though, I think is something the people have a high degree of confidence in, and that the people at Starbucks know what they're doing.
Well, sure.
And the TSA, particularly, I don't want to go off on a tangent too much, but it's just coming out that they miss night when the red teams, the TSA, the undercover people go and try to get guns and stuff through.
Right.
They get them through 95% of the time. So if I'm standing in Starbucks, I'm pretty sure they know what they're doing. The drink order will almost certainly be correct, even if I give them a complicated one. Go to TSA and I'm like, I'm standing in a line for nothing, as opposed to I'm standing in a line for a drink that I will enjoy.
Well, I should have prefaced by saying this was in the very beginning, not as the agency went on and became kind of more of a punching bag. Mm-hmm. But you're right. There were all those issues that were going on, and we didn't get into a lot of that. We didn't, we were getting into more of the. We were getting in more of the creation of and the foundation of. But it was very interesting. And they said they brought in people from Disney and FedEx, and they brought in people of industry to help them. The serpentine line was that you see at TSA was because of Disney. Disney is the one that helped them with that. It's very interesting how it all came to be. So that's what the special's more about.
All right, and Shannon Farron is using some very aggressive body language to shoo us out of here right now because they have their show coming up. So I don't want. I want it to. I want it to.
Do they have a show today?
I want it to stay nonverbal and non-contact before she really ups her efforts. Steve, thank you. The special 3 to 5 p.m. on Saturday on KFI. A rerun if you can't listen to it 3 to 5, 8 to 10 p.m. that night.
Right, and online at KFIAM640.com. for the replay of the coverage of KFI and the 6-part podcast.